Well, it's time for my film reveal video. This is where I take a look at my film for the very first time and get a feeling for how things turned out. Now, since this was a backpacking trip and I was shooting individual photos on most scenes, I only exposed 13 sheets of film, all of which are Provia, and but there's a pretty wide variety of subjects. So we'll see how I did. And also I should mention that each sheet of film is in a protective sleeve, and so I can handle it just fine with the fingers and such. All right, so this is the first subject I photographed. There was this field filled with wildflowers, and there was this juniper trunk, and I really liked how it was, surrounded by the flowers, and how also there was this one flower growing right from it. And when setting up the composition, I was paying close attention to this area here, the amount of space along the top there. And I was moving through the scene with the framing tool that I used and trying to find what gave me the best angle. And I liked it when the trunk curved in a little bit like this, which required the camera to be in a very specific spot. In terms of exposure, it's pretty good. There's a little bit of harsher light here, here, and here. I should have two variations of this one since I wasn't on the backpacking trip yet. Let's see how we did for focus. It is sharp. Depth of field is tricky. In reality, I think I have all of what I really need. I think I'll have to scan this to get a feeling for it, and I'll see how it compares to the other one. I may need to cool it down just a little bit, but we'll see. I'm happy with the composition. Provia is a very faithful film that's conservative on contrast, and so I have plenty of dynamic range for a scene that's partially lit by the sun. But I do like that. I think I'll need to scan it to get a better feel for it. Then another variation of that one. Now this one, the light is notably warmer, and I'm trying to remember, I think I may have used a warming filter on this one. I think that's the difference that we're seeing. And it's interesting how I had just mentioned that this one, I thought I might want to cool it down a little bit. But when I look at them side by side, I don't know. And it could be something where I take this one and cool this one down a little bit, because I do like the added warmth that it gives the flowers. It makes some of the highlights a little bit less harsh in a way. But I think I'll need to scan either of those, scan both of those, and see how they do. But I'm happy with the composition, and I wouldn't mind if it was a little bit more flat lighting for them, just to make it a little easier to work with. Now I found this scene while on the first day of the backpacking trip, and I actually had pulled out my iPhone and I was pointing it up toward the canyon wall, because there was something that looked like this. There's this rock that looked like this guy with a flat top with kind of a goofy grin on. And so I pulled my phone out of my pocket, and as I did that and turned on the camera app on it, it was pointing straight down at my feet. And I saw that, I'm like, well, here I am standing right in front of this, and I think this is actually a pretty compelling subject. I think you'll need a little bit of work with the contrast and with the color. I'm pretty sure I used a warming filter on this one, which does warm it up nicely, though I feel like I need to restore some of the natural blue tones a little bit. But I really liked how this rock was buried. This one was not. Yeah, the bigger rock, the smaller rock. You have all the trailing dried mud behind it, all the cracks there. To me, this one has some potential in terms of storytelling. Just because like the relationship between those two, this one appears to be caught. So we'll see. I like what I see. I think it'll need a little massaging in Photoshop. And it is tack sharp. But in reality, it was a fairly easy scene because it's a flat plane. But I do like that. I'll need to scan it to get a feeling for it. But it just has some interesting shapes. And there were some massive flash floods that went through that canyon. There were 4 cottonwood trees I remember from last year that were just simply gone. This was a little further down the wash. I did not use a warming filter for this one. With this scene, I liked how we had the layers of cracked mud. And in the foreground, you had these interesting lines with the rocks embedded, bigger curls, and then smaller cracks there. And again, I like this one. When setting up this composition, I gave it a little bit, I moved the visual emphasis up a little bit higher to give a little more tension, as opposed to having this centered. But you notice how this is in the upper portion there. Hopefully focus is good on this one. Yeah, it's tack sharp. It's tack sharp. Yeah. That turned out really, really nice. I really look forward to scanning this one to see how it does. But man, this one's definitely about texture. And it reminds me of cinnamon. The color, little curls there. I like that. It is kind of amusing somewhat to hike into this canyon with these beautiful trees and canyon walls, and I'm taking pictures of mud. Good lighting on this one. I had my reservations about this after taking the photo because I looked at my scouting photos with my iPhone, and they weren't very appealing, but Provia did very nice with it. All right. This is the scene that I returned to this year specifically to photograph. And just back behind me was a massive cottonwood log from one of those trees, and it was swept downstream. And as I was working my way down the canyon, I began to be a bit concerned that there were several trees that were just gone from where they were. They'd been swept downstream. I remembered that there were these 2 boulders that I wanted to photograph, and I was just concerned that there'd be a pileup of like 3 or 4 massive cottonwood trees there, but thankfully that tree was back behind it. But you can see how rounded these boulders are, and they take some abuse in some of those big flash floods. A little bit more water this year than last. When setting up this composition, I was not a huge fan of having these rocks right here, but not much you could do about it. I wanted to have enough foreground to show the water, to show the base of this. I'm trying to work with that distance and that distance so that the tree fits in there. And I really do like this wall back here. Now, this is a scene I tried to photograph last year, but when I went there, I just didn't have the warm light and I didn't have the calm wind. And this year, you can definitely see I'm catching some of that really nice warm light. I may need to do a little strategic dodging and burning, maybe burn this down just a little bit, put a little more emphasis on the tree there. I used a warming filter for this because even though this is reflected light, a good chunk of, there's a lot of blue sky overhead. And so by putting the warming filter on, it makes it look pretty much like it does to the eye. And we have a little bit of movement on the leaves, but not bad. Perfectly fine. The other tricky thing was focus. So, this is fairly close to the camera. That's quite a ways away. And I focused basically on the edge of those plants right there, which, if you look at it from the side, is about halfway between this rock and that tree. And that is
tack sharp. The tree is tack sharp. The wall is just fine. A little out of the focus, but which is fine because it's a background. And in terms of foreground,
I'd say I have about to here, which is good. So I'm basically enough to get this profile, that rock. So I'm very happy with that. I think I may need to cool it down a little bit, but my exposure is solid. That's the other thing I was a little worried about, but very happy with that. I think that may be a image for the portfolio set this year. And then an alternate variation of that.
And I think the previous one is a little bit better in terms of wind movement.
The same general scene. I mean, it is the same scene. Same scene, same light, but the previous one had a little bit better, a little more still exposure. So those cottonwood leaves, they flutter just the slightest of a breeze. But very happy with that, because that's the one I went back there to photograph. More cracked mud. You'll notice a trend here. I mean, I'm pretty happy with it. Immediately out of view on the bottom, and you can't see it on here, but there was a llama track. So I was able to exclude that. But I liked how there was this almost like a bit of a triangular shape with the lines there, the flowing mud, the curls, and I do like this.
It is tack sharp. Color is very natural.
And what's really cool is up in here, there are some raindrops. So you get some little dots in there, which is quite nice. Again, I'll need to scan it. I did not use a warming filter on this one, I don't believe. I don't believe I did. I try to use the warming filter if there's a bit more blue sky than reflected light, because Provia has a tendency to go a little bit cyan. Yeah, I like it. And again, shooting individual photos. And some parts of the wash were just absolutely blasted by the floodwaters. And you had these really interesting patterns with a rock, and then you have the trails that go on quite a ways behind them. And they look like, you know, shooting stars in the night sky. And so this is one that I found, and there was a little bit of clouds that afternoon, but I knew that for this subject, since the light is reflecting off a sandy bank pretty close to this, I knew it'd work pretty well. I'd be tempted to cool this one down just to see how it responds, and get a little bit more of a
kind of a spacey sort of feel to it. But it is tack sharp. So yeah, this will definitely be one to scan to see what I think about it.
but I think it might do well with a little bit of a cooling effect. It's kind of like the opposite of a hoodoo. The hoodoos are when you have the rock that's on a softer sediment pillar. So it's kind of like that, but just on the ground and with the floodwaters. But I'm cool with that. Now this one, I know that the light is not ideal on this one. There were some clouds that afternoon. This was taken the evening after I shot the photo with those rounded boulders with a cottonwood tree. And I'm glad I photographed that other scene on my first day there, just because the conditions were not as ideal this day. So I was not able to photograph the strong glow on this, where this one gets really good glow. But I was a little conflicted because when the scene does have a really good glow to it, the background is almost overwhelming. So I don't know, I want to try this one again when I go back there next year. And hopefully this bush here doesn't get bulldozed by the floodwaters, because that's what this wall of sediment is from. It's just getting eaten away when those flash floods rage through. But I think there's potential there. Now I have the camera perfectly level, and then you have the lines coming in at a little bit of an angle, which gives a little bit of an uncertain feeling to it. But maybe that's not such a bad thing, because this bush is just clinging to life and it has a fairly uncertain existence. But a bit of a sketch of that scene. Now I photographed this on my hike out of there. In terms of composition, one thing I made sure to do is make sure that the top of this tree extended above this pile of boulders, because I want this tree to span between this and this. And if I had positioned my camera such that this tree, the top of the tree is ending below that boundary, then I think it wouldn't connect the two, and I think that's important. Now typically when photographing junipers, I like photographing the old weathered junipers that have so much character to them. But in this case, I feel like this tree has a bit more of like a promise of, kind of a hopeful kind of existence, just among all the grasses and such, and then with this huge wall in the background where it feels like it's being protected. So I just centered that. And my exposure is good. I definitely am a little bit on the bright side, but that's intentional, because I didn't want to lose any detail in here, and there's a pretty big difference. So in my mind, I knew that I would let this go fairly bright, but still within the range of the film, and probably darken this down a little bit in post. And I should have all the detail that I need.
In terms of sharpness, it is tack sharp. And it was absolutely calm that morning. There were not any clouds in the sky, but they did develop a little bit later on.
And the other thing I wanted to make sure I included was seeing where the tree is rooted into the ground. There's something very important about showing that little bit right there. So I tried to find an area where I could see that, and then I just used my 240mm lens, which is a moderate wide angle. But I do like that. I think there's some definite potential there. All right, in the final scene I photographed, there was a little bit of wind, as you can see from that plant right there, and I still need to figure out what type of plant this is to satisfy my own curiosity, because they were in bloom, they were absolutely beautiful. But this was a very tricky scene, because with large format, especially with 8x10, my depth of field is tiny. And for many scenes, you can take the front standard and tilt it down a little bit. When you do that, the plane of focus is going to drop down, but you can't do that as well when you have a big wall like this, because as I connect the foreground to there, then I will likely be out of focus above where the plane of focus slices through. But also we have these tall stalks right there, and my plane of focus is actually going from the base of this to about here. So anything above that plane, which would be these right here, will be out of focus. And as you extend it into a wedge like that, it kind of drops back and catches all this. So basically all this means that in order to get this part in focus, and this in focus, and most of this in focus, I have to sacrifice a little bit of the top. I have to sacrifice those flowers. So in that sense, the fact that there's a little bit of wind movement here may not be a bad thing, because those flowers are not in focus.
So we'll see. Yeah, so just as expected, my foreground
is in focus. So all of this is in focus. This part right here is a little out of focus. By the time we get back to here, this area is in focus. So basically the plane of focus goes from this, kind of skips over this area here, and then I'm good again back here.
And we'll see how we do with the canyon wall. Canyon wall's good, good, good. And I start losing it.
So I lose a little focus here, I lose a little focus here, but I'm sharp here and I'm sharp there. So it's a compromise photo. But that's just kind of how it works with a large format, where you're not going to get everything all the time. But I know I have other variations of this one as well. So I'm more in focus in terms of not having wind motion with this one.
I think the
Flower stalks are in the good enough category.
That's the thing about large format. It's a matter of embracing the imperfection of the craft.
This one is actually pretty good. So the tops of the flowers are actually not in focus, but they're close enough. So we have this in focus, this is a little soft, it gets sharper as you go up, this is sharp, that's a little bit soft. In a perfect world, I wouldn't have minded to scoot over a little bit more to move this a bit more into the frame, but then those flowers are not going to be set up against that bush as much, and I think they needed to have that for separation. So I'm actually quite happy with this one. Again, it's an exercise of embracing the imperfection of the craft. I'll need to scan that, see what I think, but I am quite happy with that. And exposure is good, color is good. Now I have two of these, and the reason is that after taking the photo, I realized that my film holder was not completely seated in the camera, and would there be a light leak? But if it wasn't perfectly seated in the holder, then that also might mean that there might be a little tweak of the focus.
And so we'll see if I can detect anything here. Honestly, not really. Though the other one had a faster shutter speed anyway, or was more friendly for wind anyways.
So the second one was the best one. But typically my spring trips are my most difficult trips. Just because the conditions are a bit tough, there's a lot of physical work involved. And even though I only exposed 13 sheets of film, I think I have a pretty high keeper rate. I think most of these are portfolio grade, which is absolutely amazing. So I'd say that this was probably my most productive spring trip in a while. It was a lot of work, but it sure was fun getting out there and exploring. But you guys know how the trip went with regard to the videos. I'm just kind of figured it out since I just got home just a couple days ago. But I want to thank Evan for watching, and we'll see you around next time. You may have noticed this video has no ads and no sponsors, and I think it's nicer that way. If you enjoy this ad-free and clickbait-free content and want to help me live my dream, a voluntary contribution through PayPal or by joining my Patreon helps keep my gas tank full and my film freezer stocked. You can find more information by visiting my website at benhorne.com/donate. I also have prints, ebooks, and my annual portfolios available on my website. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you around next time.